Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining this webinar on how to spot waste development how to spot waste in IT development. We're joined here today by Stephane Rodet and also Lucile Jerber from IBM. So they're going to be delivering this talk today. Before we get into that, I'd like to just give a brief introduction into responsible computing as a program. So my name is Michael Linehan. I am the program director here at Responsible Computing, and we are a membership consortium that provides a holistic framework for setting responsible corporate policies. We help our members apply and demonstrate responsible computing principles to restore trust in technology. And we do this across six different domains, beginning with data centers, infrastructure, code, data usage, systems, and impact. Right now, we're working on a number of key deliverables, including a generative artificial intelligence white paper. We're also working on a responsible computing maturity model, which would be a sequel to the sequel to the responsible computing self-assessment, which we published earlier this year. We also published a dark data white paper. And we're working currently as well on getting our technology showcase program off the ground. So those are real life implementations of previously untested technologies. And we would then take them through our responsible computing self-assessment and also aligning them as well to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So those are some of the areas we're working on right now. And if anybody would like to speak to any member of staff about potentially joining the consortium, I'm going to pop an email address into the chat, into the announcements for people to get in touch with if you'd like to following this presentation. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Stephane and to Lucile for the talk. And thank you very much, everyone, for attending.
Perfect. Thank you, Michael, and thank you everyone for joining. So as Michael said, today we're going to talk about responsible coding. So let me make an introduction. So why is it important to talk about responsible coding and more specifically waste in IT? As I'm sure you saw every day, it seems like when you go on the internet, you see a new scandal that touches IT. When it comes to personal data usage, or maybe the impact on the environment that some technology has, for example, this data center in Ireland that was stopped, or the energy consumption and water consumption of ChatGPT, and the way your data is being used every day. So obviously, the way we are doing things right now isn't the way we need to do it long term if we want to make sure that IT is sustainable. So we need to start thinking differently about technology and the way you use them. So for that, as Michael introduced, so I won't spend too much time on that, we made a team that worked more specifically on the responsible code aspect and how we can think differently about code. And we settled on a definition because responsible code might be a bit vague when we start thinking about it initially. But we settled on the idea that responsible code is just to be aware of the potential impact your code can have on the environment, society, and on the economy. And once you know that some of your design and requirement choices can have a negative impact, you want to be aware and try to minimize this impact as much as you can. So it's not a specific thing that you can do for each technology and everything. Code is very vast. There are different applications, different framework, everything. But it's just making sure that when you choose something instead of something else, the same way you choose something when you go to the store and buy something, your choice matters and that you can minimize the maybe negative impact. So what is specifically responsible code? So responsible code, so the idea of minimizing the impact of what you do doesn't just fall on the developer and architect. There are many people that can make choices that will impact the end result. So when it comes to developer, architect, it's obvious. It's a choice technology where you store your code, the infra, everything. When it comes to the designer, more touches on the web development part. So if your designer chooses to have a very modern page with videos everywhere that are on autoplay and on repeat, it has an impact that is far greater than if you just use a static image. So they need to be conscious on that too. And same goes for the product owner. If they choose to add a feature that is useless or that has an impact compared to what you gain from it, maybe they need to rethink just adding this feature. And for the end users, you can also have a choice on whether you partake in some technology or choose to use something if you know the impact. So the example of cryptocurrency is the first thing that comes to my mind, but you can, it touches on the societal and the environment. You need to just be aware of the impact and then make a conscious choice. And responsible code isn't just the environment. So there are 3 dimensions that we worked on. So the environment, making sure that your code is optimized and doesn't use that much electricity. There's the social responsibility. So being aware of the way you use the user data, what model you use, where your data comes from, making sure your app is accessible, but you take into account the digital divide between generations out there. And then there's the economic responsibility, because if you build a code that is perfectly socially and environmentally conscious, but no one can read it, or the app is useless, then you will just have wasted resources, because if the app is useless, no one will use it. And if you build something that is perfect, but I lost my train of thought, but you get the idea. It's just making sure that, but you make something that is great for the end user, but not for the developer that will go after you. Then you will need to have a new developer that come after you to redevelop the app, because your app is not maintainable or it's not comprehensible by anyone else than you. So again, waste of resources, because you will have to do the same thing twice for the same result. So it matters. Now we are going to more specifically talk right now about the environmental aspect, because when it comes to societal impact, there are a lot of resources already online, and for the economic impact too. So we wanted to focus on the environmental side that is talked less. And still it matters, because digital services, as of right now, amount to 4% of the global greenhouse gas emission worldwide. So it's more than the aviation, so more than all the planes that fly into the atmosphere. Digital services produce more greenhouse gas. But it's not just that. You have also the way, so different type of energy, but you have also the water consumption. So if you take into account the 4.2% of the energy consumption, it's 2 to 3 times the footprint of France. So it's massive if you think about it. And it might not come from where you think, because usually when people think of the impact of IT on the environment, the first thing we think about is data centers, but it really isn't. What has the most impact as of right now is the user consume equipment. So laptops, phones, every basically thing that is manufactured and produced has the biggest impact, because the creation, so the extraction of minerals and the production in factory pollutes a lot and requires a lot of energy, but actually outweighs the lifetime of your equipment. So producing the equipment uses more electricity than all of the electricity you will use to recharge your phone or laptop during its entire lifetime. So why does it matter? Because basically, I think to me, when you're a developer, the best thing you can do for the environment is to make sure that your code is compatible with older software, older hardware, sorry, because it's the need to switch to a better computer, to switch to a better phone that makes the most impact compared to if you have a web page that is perfect. So it's better to have a web page that is perfect because you don't want people to change their phone than the other way. I hope it's clear. And right now I'm going to leave Stephane on the good practices that you can implement in your job when coding to have a better impact.
Yeah, thanks, Lucile. Yeah, it's good to look at those points, and each time I hear that again, I'm like, yeah, I think about new things, and it's such an important things to be aware of. So let's have a look at the practices and what we can do. Did you know actually that the web pages are getting bigger? Well, you probably know that, but did you know that they were getting bigger faster than the bandwidth over the last 10 years? Which means that the pages now are slower than 10 years ago, right? And even from a non-environmental point of view, this doesn't look good, right? Because a slow page, slow in this case is not really an advantage, right? And what's interesting is that they are getting slower. Why? Because they are getting bigger and more stuff with stuff. This is another anecdotal evidence, which is, well, this is a different place. This is about developer tooling, but I think it fits pretty well with the topic of responsible code, right? There are some single package of JavaScript software, right, that, and this is an example, and I don't want to pinpoint them. This is really an example that put here. There are many others that run in this ballpark. But for example, here, install a package, and then it installed 1,300 dependencies. And those dependencies in overall weight around 500 megabytes unpacked. And by the way, as you can see, I got myself a few security vulnerability in the same time, which might not be super big. They might not even be ones that you are easily able to actually enable and use. But when you deliver software, and especially like the type of business that our company IBM is on, you have to deliver something that's actually safe and proven safe, right? And it never looks good to deliver security vulnerability with your code. So you see, like, we have actually a package that should actually do something simple, but that actually weighs a lot. So when you look about the first topic, which is the weight of web page, for example, it's a lot of money just left on the table, right? When you have a slow page, you lose on the bounce rate, so the user leave. As Lucile said, you have higher client requirements, which also makes you lose some users. It costs you more in terms of bandwidth. And then you have higher energy and storage costs, both for you and the user and the network. So it's really a lose-lose-lose opportunity here. And well, so that's interesting. I spent quite some time, looking at websites and sometimes randomly measuring their performance. And try to do that for yourself. And it's interesting. You'll find that, for example, some companies, even those who have great reputation in that area, are highly unequal. And it's not really related to the volume of functionality they offer on the page, right? And so, but you will notice that a lot of experience that sometimes for important flagship products are very slow. Like when you measure them, you realize that they are very slow. And sometimes I wonder, it seems to be like the industry best kept secret, right? That actually better web performance makes lots of money, a lot, right? It makes millions. And in that view of web, responsible computing, for me, this is a great display that when you make a better performance for your web page, then you get more users, you get more user engagement. So that means that people are happy to use it. And, as we said, we are excluding less users with simpler web page. And we are making our solution more useful to the people who want to use it, actually, right? So don't take this only at the surface. There is a lot to unpack from some such studies. Well, so now, of course, performance isn't always related to just the amount of weight you deliver, right, on the bandwidth. But we have shown before that this is actually the case, that in average, the pages are getting heavier and heavier. If you want more data to convince yourself or to convince your boss, then there is this great website, wpostats.com, that actually gives many examples, especially around the Google Web Vitals, which are very low-level metrics about the rendering of the page, and when, how long it takes to paint, how long it takes to react to user input, and like very basic technical metrics. But there is a very strong correlation. There is a strong attachment of those values to the actual stickiness to users, and finally to the financial results of a digital solution. So you see, there is a lot of responsible aspect into this, but this also turns into business outcome. Finally, there is this Cloudflare study about conversion rate, which I found also really very impressive. It's one about something very granular. So a call to action could be anything, right? It could be a subscribe button, it could be a buy button, it could be an application button, it could be a lot of things, but it's like usually what the main action that a website proposes you on a web page, right? And if you look at that, you will see that when you render your page in 2.4 seconds, you have 1.9 conversion rate. So it's still not a huge lot, but this is what it is. This is by far the best result here. And when you go above 5 seconds, then you're under 0.6. So I think most of you will recognize that there is actually a 3x, so 300% difference in here. So look, you make your website a bit more than twice faster, and you get a 300% return for that. I mean, which business leader wouldn't want that, right? And also, you might have like any kind of things, you know, even if you're a nonprofit, for example, you still care about people supporting your cause and getting through the overall experience. And one very interesting thing about that is that the people mostly don't notice that, like decision that it is being taken of, continuing or not is most often actually not conscious for the user. So this is something very interesting here. So let's say you are working on a product right now to deliver a digital solution, a website, whatever you have. What is in for you? So first, I would recommend for you to get a quick look at your current score in terms of performance. Like what's your maximum loading time? What does Lighthouse say about your performance? So Lighthouse is a tool that you will find in any Google Chrome installation. You have to do a right click on your page, you click on inspect, and then you have a tab rather at the right that is called Lighthouse. This is a web measurement for measuring the performance and the accessibility and other capabilities of your web app. So it's been made by Google to encourage good practices, better practices in terms of, how can I, it's actually just hygiene, right? This is like application hygiene. And, you get a score that's between 0 and 100, 0 being the worst, 100 the best. And then just take a look at that and maybe measure yourself against similar websites or competitors or whatever. And I think you will learn a lot. So when I asked the same question to developer teams, usually there were not many. Clearly, the very small minority did know in what ballpark they were for the Lighthouse performance. So try to measure and also discuss with your team, like, how do you think we are doing? Propagate the results and have a discussion, engage with that. It's very easy to engage even people who are not directly technical into those discussions. A lot of what I'm speaking about now is actually it's been really like inspired by Worldwide Ways. So this is a book and also a podcast by Jerry McGovern. And this is really a great source, very inspiring. And so when we had those discussions with Lucile, we started going deeper into this topic and also relating on our own experience and knowledge that we had working with products and clients to go a bit further in some aspect. But if you are looking a bit more at the why and the broader picture of all of this discussion, then I really encourage you to have a look at that or to listen to the podcast, because it will give you lots of it's a big opportunity to reflect on your own work and understand, oh yeah, I never looked at all that as waste actually, right? For me, it was just my computer. It was just my files. It was just the message I exchanged with people. And then you start noticing, oh, wow, there is actually a lot that's not really needed. And that's actually having more impact than I was aware. So I find that during this preparing this presentation, you can find on many aspects. And again, this is not pinpointing a special example here. This is just one single example, but almost all software is written that way. It doesn't really take a lot of care of deleting or helping you deleting all the information. I don't know about you. I can think easily of like 10, endless data pits I have, like endless places, my mails, for example, that very rarely actually get cleaned up. And if you think at the software, it makes you usually very hard for you to actually delete stuff, right? It asks you to go on every single items and is not trying to, benefit from the popular wisdom of other users, for example, or making some recommendation or trying to archive it to some cold storage where you wouldn't find it anymore. So in some cases, this actually happens behind the scenes, right? And you don't see it, but you never know. It's not transparent anymore for the user. So this is completely hidden usually. And so, yeah, a lot of software is just optimizing for lots of consumption, right? So it's not optimizing for really like user value, but rather capacity consumption. So really, you have to consider the whole data lifecycle when you produce something, right? So what data is your app producing in terms of logs, in terms of database entries, right? Can you uninstall your software without letting a trace? Can you just delete it and be sure that everything is removed? I think a good example, for example, in that direction might be a local container where you can really remove it from all, and where you can always remove all, even the archived entry from your registry, is completely gone. Maybe you have some policy that after 1 or 2 years, you didn't need to archive something specific, or you decide to, instead of keeping all the single step of your build step, you just keep the source code and then the final product. Do you have also some file and data deprecation? So, it's always useful to remind ourselves from maybe the old time for the people who are longer in this industry. Like I remember when I had a chat program that would automatically delete my content after 1 year. And so I just learned to deal with that. Like I would usually not need to save anything, but sometimes I knew I had some important file. I would just save them locally. And then I knew I was safe. And then my chat log was always very simple because I knew I only had the last year in there. And I think in many cases, it helps actually the user sanity, because the whole list of things is simpler to deal with. You have less stuff to look for. You have probably more stuff that's relevant for you. So I think it might be useful to think about that. And now this topic is coming back. I've heard, for example, that in some cases GDPR implied that you would delete the discussion after sometimes when they were not relevant, right? So you can have different criteria for where, but having, for example, a timely limit on the chats might be one way to do that. And yeah, and finally, do you help your user clean up what's unused? If there is something that's not used, why keep it around just for the need, right? So going back to the more clearer case of web pages, because I want to go a bit deeper in that to give you an overview of how does it look like and what can we do, right? If I look at a news page, for example, there is so much JavaScript in it, right? And so when you look at what the JavaScript is doing on a page, there is a lot of that works actually for external vendor, for user tracking, from advertising. And so, of course, the page needs that functionality to enable it. But the way it has been solved so far is very like JavaScript heavy. And this weighs a whole lot. Like when you think that for viewing a media homepage, you have almost 10 megabytes of content, you can actually hold multiple books in that amount of content, right? So if you look sometimes at how much an e-reader book weighs, for example, you see a different scale, right? For the number of information that can be held in 9 megabytes, actually very high. And so, of course, all these things needs also a lot of time to be transferred over the network. So it's important to have a look at that. There are also a few examples of pages that are made with performance in mind. And you don't see that always at the first sight, right? So sometimes you have to go to the inspector and realize like, wow, those websites are actually only like 200 kilobytes, because the experience they offer you is actually pretty great. So when you work with your code, there are sometimes very simple steps to actually measure the performance. So Lighthouse was the first one. I'm taking now a very big shortcut. I know that many of you are using different tools for building web apps, and I'm just using the most popular one at the moment, which is React. But I've noticed that many developers were not aware that when you do a standard React app, very often you use the Create React App tool for creating this. Then really in a few lines and a few minutes at most, you can start a bundle analyzer. You just need to install a package, describe a one-line script in your package.json, and then run it. And what it gives you is a 2D map of your JavaScript with what package are in. And already seeing this is very nice, because sometimes you will see you did use just the slightly wrong import statement where you just mix up the few characters, happened me once. And then suddenly you don't import just one function out of a package, but the whole package with all its dependency. So you might be importing, for example, things like icon packages or images that you didn't need actually. So a lot of things can move onto your bundle without you realizing. And this is really a quick step, and usually you can, fix those kind of problems, and usually focusing on the biggest 2 or 3 items. And it's not rare to get like double-digit gains in a few hours at most, sometimes even less. So be aware of that and run it regularly. And then afterwards, you can make like on your, Webpack, when you configure JavaScript, you can set hard limits on the size of the bundles and so on. So there are lots of very small, simple steps to be taken where you can actually limit the amount of stuff you deliver to our user by design. And this makes the jobs of a developer and the designer and everyone in the team much simpler, because then the tool will tell them when things start to get too big and need to be split up or simplified. One thing that's important, though, is that very often I noticed that developers were really looking at their own experience at the cost of their users, right? So I know that it's so simple and quick and fast to install some JavaScript dependency and, hey, look, in 10 minutes, I have some additional capability. And so this is something that's very tempting that most people are doing. And very often we don't ask ourselves what's the cost of that. And as I told you before, like, we have the whole bigger topic, which we should take much more care about, which is about like the responsibility we have for the environment, for our energy usage, right? And this is something that you think, well, but it might not move the needle at all, right? So first of all, it will, and this is very important. And I've seen many projects. I have seen some projects. I've seen one project I've seen in one occasion, the biggest of all, we've seen by 1 or 2 days of performance tuning, we've seen a 40x improvement in the reduction of weight of the page. Same functionality, we just fixed like basic things like compression, unneeded import, better separation of the pages, and then we had a 40x improvement in the page load. But so there is a real financial impact that's a very direct one, right? I think you all know that electricity keeps getting more expensive, also less reliable. So we all have a very strong duty to reduce the energy usage of the things we use. And with that, you'll make your user happy, you'll get more user using your products. And at the same time, you will be doing something good for your company finance and for the environment. So there is only a win-win here. And the problem is that very often this whole JavaScript cost gets unnoticed. The organization don't really have like strong limits for them. Well, so of course, not all organizations do, and I'm sure a few people in the audience already know most of that and have the guardrails already in place. And I am pretty confident they see good results with that and it works well for them. But at the same time, I think that, and I've seen that many people don't have that knowledge yet. And so that's why it's so important to, absorb that knowledge, those new information, like now, maybe spend a few nights or a few weeks sleeping on it, reflecting about it. And then at some points, you'll probably have this moment where you think, oh yeah, of course, for this project, I should change this and that. And what if I checked the performance cost of the things I'm working on at the moment? And you will see pretty quickly that there are lots of opportunities opening. So what can you do for example, as a web developer, right? So let me share with you an internal story. I was showing Gatsby with that, and I had someone on my team got really upset about all that, and the complexity and the weight, and started thinking a lot more about this and what can we do. And we were using Gatsby not for a very complex use case, but for rendering really a markdown website to our design system with React components. So we had a look. We noticed that this design system had actually a web component implementation. And then the colleague spent a few hours, and in a few hours, he was able to write a small renderer that based on Jekyll, which was pretty great because it's already built into GitHub. And so suddenly we had a system that would just take a few lines of template and a bit of code to build in the web components. And wow, like the results were really impressive, right? We had suddenly, instead of 500 megabytes of dependencies, we had basically just this one file that we used for setting up the web components. And mostly we could use Jekyll as is. And so the install time was suddenly 0. The build time also as well. So we had a much better experience for the people who would edit the content and publish content, because they could just press edit and it would be instantaneously on. They wouldn't have, especially for non-technical folks, to wonder and to pray if the CI/CD build will go through. And everything was much simpler. The support is much quicker because we have much less complexity to manage. So either we have small problems in the code or we don't. And so everything's gotten more simpler with that. So I thought this was really a great example of simplification that has done a lot of good. And sometimes we get too coked up in the current way things are being done and so on, to reflect about, is there a way we can do it simpler maybe? So sometimes it's useful to think radically. Before I told you, you should take your code and look at what's being done on it. And so you will probably see and find some potential for improvement. And I would say, like, even if you get to a 2 or 3 time improvement, that's already a whole lot. Like everything, the numbers you saw before about the impact of IT, the energy usage, the CO2 emission, if I can drive this by 2 or 3 times, will not be done for the eternity, of course, but it will be much better than many of the industry out there. And I think, we have actually, we have potentially an easier time than some other industry, right? I'm thinking about the transport industry, for example, the aviation industry. They simply just don't have an easy path to 2 or 3x improvement. And they don't even have an easy path to 15% reduction, right? For them, 15% reduction is like a major accomplishment with patents and new innovation and trade secret and all the things and major contracts out there. 15% improvement is destroying the competition. So it's interesting to reflect back at IT and think like, oh, hey, what if we did our part ourselves, right? So sometimes you have to think radically though, right? When you're too, you're too deep, for example, in the JavaScript ecosystem, you have way too many dependencies, then maybe it's time about what if we start with something fresh or take a new approach to the problem. Sometimes just looking at the thing in a plain like evolutionary matter is not bringing it to the right point, right? But so try to take it backwards and say what is important to offer, right? And look at what is the performance goal. Like, for example, do I really want to provide a web page that takes between 5 and 10 seconds to load on actual connections, not on the one you have at work on your 10 gigabits per second fiber, but really like where your user are. And sometimes I once had a talk with someone from Google actually who told me, they were optimizing for plain flyers, right? So what happens when you actually want to provide a great experience to people who are in planes? I think that's an interesting thing to reflect on, right? You might have some people with very powerful devices and who being actually like, you would think they have the best infrastructure, but if they're on the go, they won't have the best infrastructure, right? And even that, I think that's a very, very weak argument, because we should be really aiming for providing good experience for everyone, including the people who have slow devices, slow connections, who don't have the money to buy, a lot of expensive equipment. So it's also very essential to provide this, of course. But even if for people who completely negate that argument because whatever, maybe you are producing for some, company software and things like that, even there, you still don't know how the end environment actually works. And finally, so explore new opportunities embedded in the platform is very important. So try to remind yourself the browser, for example, is getting more and more capable. So lots of things that before you had to write a lot of JavaScript code, the day they are embedded into the browser, then you don't need all that code and you can make things way simpler, way faster, and way more elegantly. And very often I fail to see teams taking advantage of that in a regular manner. So try to look regularly, what did come, what is the new thing that I can take benefit from, and so maybe I can get rid of another library or two. And finally, keep monitoring, make those performance and how much data you consume, how much data you use,
Thank you very much, Stephane and Lucile, for illuminating, I guess, what is a very underappreciated area in terms of sustainability. So I thank you very much for that. Very insightful talk. And as Stephane mentioned, if you would like to get involved in what we're doing, you can do so by heading over to responsiblecomputing.net. So with that, before we wrap things up, we want to ask if there are any questions for Stephane or Lucile. If you do have a question, you can pop it into the questions window, which should be at the side of your screen, I believe. It is for us anyway, at least on the presenter view. So we'll maybe give it just a minute just to see if there are any questions coming in.
I think I might have thrown too much information at once.
If it was just so comprehensive, Stephane, that it required no questions, that could be it, you know.
That's
Yeah.
that's the less likely option.
In the future, if that talk made you think of anything and you want to discuss it, you can, I think, contact us on LinkedIn. I'm not going to talk for Stephane, but in my case, you can send me a message on LinkedIn.
Yes, and please make it clear that you're not a recruiter.
Yeah, I won't look to you. I'm sure you said you looked at this webinar.
Well, I think if you're getting flooded with recruitment offers, then you're doing something right. So thank you very much, everyone. And we'll wrap it up there. And I guess have a great rest of your day, evening, morning, wherever you're located. Thank you.
Thank you.